All right, let's talk about something that sounds, let's be honest, incredibly boring: security policies. But what if I told you that this paperwork is actually the high stakes drama standing between a company's success and total, absolute disaster? Let's get into it. So, let me ask you a question. You've got a massive tech company that literally just disappeared. And then you have a credit agency that leaked the personal data of pretty much half the country. What on earth could possibly connect these two epic catastrophes? Now, the first thing that jumps to your mind is probably hackers, right? These super smart cyber criminals or state-sponsored groups. And look, you're not wrong, but that's not the real story. That's not the root cause. The truth is something way more common and, frankly, way more preventable. Believe it or not, it all came down to this. The single point of failure in both of these disasters was dusty, ignored, and unenforced security policies. Yeah, paperwork. Let's dig into how that's even possible. Okay, so our first story takes us back to the early 2000s, and our main character is Nortel. At the time, they weren't just a company, they were a Canadian telecom titan, a global powerhouse. But behind the scenes, a secret was brewing that would lead to their complete and utter collapse. So here's the wild thing about the Nortel hack. This wasn't some lightning-fast overnight job. Oh no, this was a slow-motion heist that played out over years. Canada's top intelligence agency literally walked into their office and said, "Hey, just so you know, there are massive amounts of your data being downloaded and sent to China." And Nortel's response? Nothing. They did absolutely nothing. So the hackers just brute forced their way in through simple executive passwords and started what's been called a vacuum cleaner approach, just sucking up everything, patents, R&D, you name it, for years. And just to be crystal clear, this wasn't just about losing some files. We're talking about the entire crown jewels of Nortel's innovation. All of it was allegedly handed over, and that intellectual property was then used to help build a brand new competitor. You might have heard of them, Huawei. Nortel, meanwhile, went bankrupt. So this brings us right to the heart of it all. What is this piece of paperwork that could have completely changed the course of history for a company like Nortel? What is an information security policy, really? The easiest way to think about it is this. A security policy is the constitution for your company's data. It's not a super technical, nerdy manual. It's a high-level document that sets the rules of the road for security. It basically says, this is what we must do, no exceptions, creating a baseline of protection for everyone in the whole organization. And this is a super important distinction. A policy is the why. It's the law of the land. It's a mandatory statement like, all sensitive data must be encrypted. A procedure, on the other hand, is the how. It's the step-by-step instruction manual that tells you exactly how to follow the law. You absolutely need both, but it all starts with the policy. And this is where it gets really serious. Following these policies isn't just a nice to have. In the eyes of regulators, lawyers, and auditors, it's something called due diligence. It's your proof that you actually tried to do the right thing. Because after a breach happens, you can bet they're going to ask two very simple questions. 1, did you have a policy for this? And 2, were you actually following it? The answer to that can be a multi-million-dollar difference. So what happens when that due diligence just completely falls apart? Well, for a horrifyingly perfect example of that, we have to talk about Equifax. Just look at that number for a second. Almost $1.4 billion. That was the estimated cost of the Equifax breach. And this wasn't the result of some genius-level hack. It was a complete and total breakdown of the absolute basics: people, process, and technology. I mean, you couldn't write a better script for what not to do. First, they knew about a critical vulnerability and just didn't patch it for months. Second, because they weren't following a basic network segmentation policy, once the hackers were in, they could just wander around wherever they wanted. And what did they find? Usernames and passwords stored in plain text. And the cherry on top? The very tool they used to monitor for weird activity had an expired security certificate, so it was completely blind to the fact that hackers were stealing giant troves of data right under their noses. Every single step was a policy failure. And just when you think it can't get any more fundamentally wrong, you get this little gem from the class action lawsuit that followed. A public-facing portal holding people's personal information was protected with the username admin and the password admin. It's just unbelievable. For a long, long time, the consequences for these kinds of failures were things like fines and bad press for the company. But the game has fundamentally changed. Now, things are getting personal. The SolarWinds case was a bombshell. For the first time ever, the SEC brought charges directly against a company's chief information security officer, personally. The allegation wasn't just that a breach happened. It was that the CISO knew about the risks, and he didn't fix them or tell the executives and investors just how bad things were. The message from the feds is loud and clear. You can't just hide or downplay risk anymore. Personal liability is now on the table. So with all this talk about lawsuits and personal liability, it's pretty easy to look at compliance and all these regulations as just a huge headache, right? But what if that's completely the wrong way to think about it? What if compliance could actually be your secret weapon? I mean, depending on what your company does, you're buried in this alphabet soup of rules, right? You've got HIPAA for healthcare, GDPR for Europe, SOC 2 for software companies. It can feel totally overwhelming trying to keep up with all of them. But here's the good news, the really good news. You don't have to start from scratch with every single one. If you look at all these different frameworks, at their core, they're all asking for the same fundamental security controls. There is a massive overlap right in the middle. And this is how you flip the script. Instead of treating compliance like a chore, you use it as leverage. Let's say you need budget for a huge project like network segmentation. Instead of just asking for it, you can go to the board and say, according to the NIST framework, which we need to follow, we are required to have this control in place. Suddenly, compliance isn't a burden. It's the justification you need to get things done. So after all that, the disasters, the stakes, where do you actually start? Whether you're a two-person startup or a giant company, there's a pretty clear roadmap you can follow. Let's build a playbook. Okay, find your company on this chart. If you're a startup just getting off the ground, you have to have the 5 policies in that first column. They are non-negotiable. An overall InfoSec policy, acceptable use, backup, change management, and a password policy. As you grow, you need to add more sophisticated policies, like a real incident response plan so you know what to do when things go bad. And for mature companies, you've got to layer on the advanced stuff, like data classification so you know where your most sensitive data is, and vendor due diligence because you're only as secure as your partners. Just find your stage and make sure you've got these covered. And I'll leave you with this one last question, because it's one thing to have a beautiful set of policies saved in a shared drive somewhere. It's another thing entirely for them to exist in practice. Are they reviewed every year? Does every single employee understand them? Is it part of your culture? Because that's how you turn a simple piece of paper into your company's strongest shield.